joining tonight's American Grand Strategy event with Mel Gamble, a retired senior officer, intelligence officer, and a longtime member of the Central Intelligence Agency. So what we thought we would do was give Mel a few minutes to introduce himself and talk just kind of some opening comments, and then we have a couple topics that we've agreed upon that may spike the interest of some of the students watching. And then from there, we'll turn into a question and answer. So my short introduction is that I spoke with Mel a couple weeks ago, and I had the privilege of seeing a number of his events up at the Spy Museum that are on YouTube, and I encourage you to watch those. But I'm also profoundly impressed by a gentleman of his ilk who has served so many years in the Central Intelligence Agency in tough spots. The Africa Division is a tough spot. Working in the Directorate of Operations is the hardest job, I think, in American government. And Mel has risen to the top of all those. So thank you for your service to the country, Mel. And I'll cede the floor to you. And why don't you make a few opening comments, and then we'll get going with the conversation.
Okay, thanks, Tim. And I'm honored to be here. And I'm honored to be able to talk to the students in the Duke University program in American Grand Strategy, as well as welcoming other audience participants. I'll talk a little bit about how I ended up in the agency. And I think there have been a number. If I asked 5 of my colleagues how did they end up joining the CIA, I think you'd get 5 different answers. And so that stereotype of just, and I hate to say stereotype, but the one-track method of just joining, going through the international relations program or those programs, it's not necessarily that way, because it's all about the people that we look for to join. And it depends on the track or the area that you join in the CIA, ranging from an analyst to a scientist to a support person or security person to a case officer. But for me, my father wanted me to join the CIA, and I learned when I was 15 that he had worked at the CIA, and he never told me. I learned from a friend of mine in high school because his father worked with my father, and he made the mistake of saying, you know, my father talks to your dad every day at the CIA. And so I went home and asked my father, what do you do? Where do you work? Because he just said federal government. And back then you could get away with that. But today that doesn't work. And so he told me what he did. And he said, you know, you should consider it. But at that time, I really wanted to be a professional baseball player. But then he told me, no, I think we have enough Black baseball players and musicians and so forth. So I want you to use your brain. So like any good kid at that time, I decided to sit down and I mapped out what I wanted to do. And that was to go to college, then go to law school, graduate from law school, practice law, and then run for Congress to become a senator. I had it all mapped out. While in high school, one of my friends, when I told them what I wanted to do, they asked me, why do you just want to settle for being a senator? Why don't you run for president? And mind you, this was in the 60s. So that was the last thing on my mind, because we just didn't think like that at that time. But I decided, why not? I mean, who's going to stop me? So that was my plan, and I mapped it out at being anal retentive. I mapped it out till 2004. This was in the 60s that I said I was going to run for president. Well, as you guess or see, I didn't make it there, but I was only off by 4 years having a Black president, having a person of African-American heritage become the president. So I can say I had something going in terms of trying to uh, uh, pick out how things might work out. So I did stay on track to join the agency. After I graduated from high school, I was accepted to law. I mean, after I graduated from college, I was accepted to law school at GW in Washington, D.C. And while working, because my father worked at the agency, um, children at that time could work as summer employees there. So I figured I'd have a year gap and I'd work and at the agency, I work at the agency, save enough money to pay for law school. I did that, and then but two senior white officers, one by the name of John Stein, stopped me one day and said, "What are you doing? And what are your plans?" And I told him I was planning to go to law school, and he said, "Why don't you want to stay and work at the agency?" I told him, no, I wasn't interested in it. But he would travel, come back, and every time I saw him, he would ask me, "Have you reconsidered?" I decided that to get him off my back, I said, "Okay, I'll take the test." And I figured once I took the test, he would leave me alone. But he didn't. And eventually, after taking the test, and they said, made me an offer on the career trainee program, I decided to test it and say, well, I'll do it for 2 years. And if I don't like it, I'll just leave and then go to law school. As it worked out, 40 years later, I was in the agency and finally retired with one of the best jobs that I think I ever had. I know that I've ever had. There were great experiences. Not all the experiences were positive, and I'll talk about some of those. But still, for a career track, if you love interacting with people, if you love traveling, the colleagues the friends that you make, I mean, the CIA, it's a family. It's the best job in the world. So I always tell people I could be the poster child for recruiting for the CIA in that sense. So that's hopefully I didn't go too far out of sync with you, Tim.
No, that's great. And I thought maybe, since a number of your viewers tonight are younger people who
Mhm.
are still thinking about what their future looks like, and I'm not sure how many of them have 40-year plans like you did, but most certainly they're thinking about jobs. You mentioned that not all the times were good. So would you be willing to talk about, or maybe give us a little bit more granularity on perhaps a celebratory time, a time that you really felt like things were going well, and you were supporting your nation and you were being recognized, or whatever the case is, and then maybe an example of a bad time, whether it was internal poor leadership, or whether the target, the problem that you were working was just impossible, so that we can understand a little bit more about that. Yeah, the good time, bad time, as a overseas collection officer whose job is to go and get information that our policymakers need.
Okay. I can't go into much detail in it, but one of the greatest highs for any case officer, and maybe I should explain that people on the outside, they refer to us as agents, but as CIA agents, but we're not agents. Agents are the people that we recruit to work for us. We refer to ourselves as case officers or operations officers. So that's the difference. The case officer recruits the agent to work for them and to provide them with the information. And overseas, the greatest feeling in the world is when you recruiting is it's a very simple mechanism. It's very difficult to do, but it's what we do is we call it spotting, assessing, developing, and recruiting. Those are the phases that what we do when we go after a target. And let's just say it's a Russian. Let's say it's a Russian that we're going after. We'll spot him. We'll identify him. Maybe he's on a diplomatic circuit. Maybe he's not. And then we try to figure out how to gain access to that person. And there are many ways of doing it. As I said, the simplest, well, we meet him on a diplomatic circuit. So they are suspicious, just like we're suspicious, and we'll look at them. We'll try to get them out for dinner or drinks or whatever, and then we'll develop that relationship. It's all about being it's all about evaluating people. That's the toughest part of our job, but and you develop the skills for that. And I'm saying this, I'm trying to put it in a little more details because a lot of people are bookworms, or they think that they can just read a book about being a spy, and then it's all of a sudden you can become a spy and everything. There's a psychological aspect to it. It's reading people. So just like if I was looking at you, I see that you have on a tie and blue shirt, I might evaluate, okay, this guy, he likes blue shirts or something. So, and that he's right-handed, and that we're getting to a conversation about tennis or sports or something that you'll find common with that person. If I may digress just for a moment, I always tell people it's kind of like dating, and when you if a guy meets I'll say, I mean, I gotta be careful. I say man, if a man meets a woman or a girl, he sees her and he wants to take her out. He can do it through 2 or 3 ways. He can be direct, go up and talk to her and ask her out. And you got to calculate what are your chances of her going out with you by just going up asking her out. You can say 50-50. It's probably less because she's probably going to look at you and say, who in the hell are you? So the next thing is you'll see that she has a friend, a guy friend or female friend that you may know. And so you may go and ask her friend, hey, what does she like to do? Does she like to go to the movies? Does she like bowling or whatever? So you find out all the things that she likes to do. And so then that increases your chances so that you know if she likes going to the movies, then rather than just going up asking her out for coffee, which can be innocent enough, but if you know she likes movies, then you might say, hey, would you like to go see this movie, Mulan? And we can, you know, and that should increase your chances. Recruiting people is very similar to that. You get all the information that you can on the person, and then you recruit the person. So for me, and as I said, most case officers, once you recruit the person and then they start to provide you intelligence that's of value to US policymakers, that's the greatest high that I think we get outside of the recruitment. It's getting the intelligence and writing it up and sending it to the US policymakers so that they can make decisions on that specific country. So, so that was on the positive
side. Yeah.
Yeah. On the negative side, I think historically, and it's improved significantly since I've retired. But when I first joined, the intelligence community, and I'll speak specifically to the CIA, they did not value as much the Blacks or minority people of color or women within the intelligence community. And so even if you had the job, you got in, there were few people that would help you work through the system. Every system, the bureaucracy of it, and the way that the system works, you learn about, whether it's in the CIA or if it's with Morgan Stanley. There's a culture there. And if you are not part of that culture or you don't understand it, it can be very difficult. And so for me, I had successes, but then I would run up against someone when I was working against a specific target that they thought, well, he's black, so it can't be, he can't be interested in that person. The target must be interested in trying to recruit him. And so I'd have to fight these battles with Washington to say, hey, look, I know what I'm doing. I've got the experience. Just let me do my job, and we'll see who's right at the end. But once you've proven that, you still have some people that support you, but when you move to another area or region, it's like starting all over again. So it became very difficult over time. But as I said, I became a senior person, so I wasn't questioned as I would have been as a junior or mid-level person. So it was difficult, but it's things that you have to overcome. And no system is perfect. You just have to. That's the as we've learned working in the CIA, you had to have a sense of humor in dealing with certain things. And then you have to be very hardcore and persistent in showing that you're going to be treated with the respect, and your views are going to be valued. So.
And I would imagine something we're going to talk about later, the complexion of the CIA has also changed. So senior leaders like yourself can help mentor and kind of hopefully reduce some of these artificial barriers that you mentioned earlier. I wanted to turn for a moment to the intelligence community. Lots of big changes in 2004 after the WMD in Iraq, the estimate and what happened and the money that we spent in Iraq. And now 17 intelligence organizations, 17 different entities. That seems challenging to me, to try to run 17 different organizations and also to try to avoid very costly overlaps. So I know that you're still in the Washington, D.C. area, or at least still keep in touch. Perhaps you could talk about current issues in the intelligence community. We have students who are applying for FBI internships, CIA, NCTC, ODNI. So pretty much across the spectrum, they're very interested in serving their nation. What are the big issues for which they should prepare?
That's a good question. Like you said, with the 17 agencies, the ODNI, I can only speak on that. And ODNI, the Office of the Director for National Intelligence, the director for that has a big job, because like you said, after 9/11, this was established, and like most bureaucracies, they don't want to take orders from anyone. They've been used to being independent, and now there's someone that comes in politically and is trying to tell them what to do. But I think over the past, what is it? Has it been 10 years? Yeah, it's been more than 10 years. People have, the organizations have come to recognize the role and accept the role of the ODNI, which is to basically pull together the intelligence for the president and the policymakers so that they can, again, make the right decisions. Most of them are still pretty independent in like you said, the FBI, DOD, well, not so much Homeland Security. That's, to be perfectly honest, from my perspective, Homeland Security is still a mess. And they need to, I know my friends at the Secret Service want to get out of there and have their own thing, but it needs to be looked at again and pulled out those things that do not need, that should not be in Homeland Security. But for young people that are interested in joining these organizations, it's a great time. Nah, let me back up and be perfectly honest. It's a difficult time to join now. And I was trying to avoid some of the political aspects of it, but the reality is that this administration is practically destroying the intelligence community. But I'm going to say that, and then from experiences, each administration comes in with certain views on how they want to run the organizations, who they trust, who they don't trust. And I'll go back to Nixon. He had running battles with the CIA and disagreed with them on Soviet assessments during that period. And so his intent when he came in as president was to not destroy the CIA, but to destroy the analysis part of it because they disagreed with him. But eventually he saw the value in the CIA and he backed off from that. Clinton was another one that didn't necessarily trust the CIA, and I think he had his own views on things. Didn't want to receive the PDB briefings, and PDB, the Presidential Daily Briefings, very much like Trump in that sense. So Trump didn't have time for that. But Clinton, after 6 months or so, he saw the value of the presidential briefings and then was accepting of it. But as I said, each president goes through something like that, but the administrations eventually come around to it. Unfortunately, I don't see that with this administration, and I'm not saying it just because it's Trump. It's just that's the reality of what's happening. So if he continues, I'm not sure how it's going to end up with the intelligence community. But most people, and this is why I was kind of hesitant in talking about this aspect of it, because most of us, when we go through those phases where we're disliked, and trust me, the CIA is at the top of that list sometimes, we put our heads down and we just do our work. And because we firmly believe that we're doing what's right for the country. Sometimes we get it wrong, but most of the time, I believe we get it right. And so the officers do their work, recruit the people that we need, gather the intelligence that we need, and we send it to the policymakers. And if it's up to them to decide whether they want to use it or not. So for the FBI, I know the people that I still speak to in the FBI, they're very much, even though they've taken a big beating, they're still very much enthusiastic about their job. And the indicator for people that are having second thoughts about joining the FBI is, look what they did in Michigan. The administration didn't come down on the white supremacists or these militias, but the FBI went in, they got their sources, and they stopped an organization from trying to kidnap the governor of Michigan and looked at the governor of Virginia. So everybody does their job, and you don't be disillusioned by what you see, because again, as parents and others always said, and this too shall pass. So we'll get there.
Oh, I think that's a good observation. And for the students, yes, the Intel community is going through a rough time right now, but it doesn't mean they're any less professional. They don't get quality training. The opportunities aren't there. I think that's your key point is, persevere. And if you want to be an intelligence professional, the door is open. Would you say it that way?
That's absolutely, you said it better than I could have. So thank you. That's
Well, we have wonderful students in our universities here in the Triangle, and many of them are interested in serving their country in some national security capacity. So it's great to see someone as successful as you and telling them about the reality of super exciting work, real challenges, but at the same time, undergirded by professionalism and quality training. Perhaps we could go to our third topic, which is
Tim.
I'm sorry, did you have something, Mel?
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing.
Please.
And while I mentioned the talking about the current president and everything, all of my colleagues, and I can say this with sincerity, all of my colleagues, if you asked me if they were Republican or Democrat or independent, I couldn't tell you because that's not something we focus on. We focus on the mission and getting the job done. We never talk about, we might talk about the president, but it's only because that's the president at that point in time, but not in a negative way. We might disagree on policy, and that's always with every president. But should we go into Iraq? Should we go into Syria? Should we do these types of things, and how should we do it? But in terms of the political aspect of it, we are apolitical. We don't talk about politics in the building or even outside the building. So keep that in mind when you're joining. It's not about whether you're Republican or Democrat or independent. It's about accomplishing the mission.
Good. Thank you for saying that. Our third topic, you've touched on it before, but for students who are thinking about going to work for the federal government or perhaps even working within the intelligence community, you as a very successful 40-year civil servant, you said you bumped into some issues of discrimination or bias, and that is an operations officer where most of your time, I would imagine, was overseas. Mm-hmm. And so you have a station chief and you have leadership that are either mentoring you or employing you, or you're a station chief yourself. So maybe talk a little bit more, if you could, about dealing with bias and diversity, and also being a champion for women and for diverse individuals, so that the CIA's complexion looks a little bit more like America's complexion. And then after you address this question, I think we'll start to, if you're willing, we'll start to have some questions from the students.
Sure. I'll be more than happy to do that. I'll give you a couple of examples of it from overseas. So when I was chief of station in South Africa, Mandela had become the president. The apartheid government had fallen, and I was replacing a white colleague who's a very good friend of mine and a very good officer. But he had a difficult time because with the Mandela government and the ANC and ANC African National Congress, which was the party of Mandela, they were taking over the positions in the intel in their intel ministry, as well as the other positions. So my colleague had a very difficult time because they just did not like him. So when I arrived, and I'm using this as an example because one of the ANC, uh, the most people think the ANC was all black, and I have to admit, even I thought that when I before I went out there, um, and then what I encountered was significantly interesting from my perspective. If there was a country that could show you an example of diversity in their intelligence community, it would be the South Africans and the ANC, because I saw that the ANC, while it was predominantly Black South Africans, there were Afrikaners, white Afrikaners that were members of the ANC. There were people, there were Indians, or they refer to them as Asians there. There were lots of Asians. There were lots of Brits. There were lots of French. There were all different types, lots of Jews. There were all different types of people that were members of that organization. And so I was in essence stunned by it, because I thought, okay, no wonder these guys had insight into a lot of stuff that was going on. So, but getting back to it, when I replaced my colleague, this Afrikaner from the ANC approached me and said, we're glad that you're here because maybe relations will improve, because they were looking at me as a Black African-American who was coming there to represent the US. Well, after 6 months, my Afrikaner colleague, we met, and he said, you know, they don't like you any more than they liked your predecessor. And I looked at him and he just started laughing, and I laughed. And so I said, what's the problem? He said, it has nothing to do with you or your color, because personally, they like you. But he says, you're an American and they don't like Americans. And he says, that's what you got to work on. So it was a lesson learned that sometimes you think it's about color, or if it's about other issues, but you find out, you narrow it down, it's about, in this particular case, just being an American. And it was something, because we didn't support the ANC when they were fighting the apartheid regime, and it was something that we were going to have to overcome with time. So that was it. And another example, and I'll hurry up because I know you want to get to some questions. I was chief of an area which I won't name, but we were training this particular government, the people in this government, on security issues, and and protection. So I sent a note to the chief of station in that particular country, and I said, I'm sending out an officer who's going to help you with the training, and it was a female officer. So the officer called me on the phone, and he was very hesitant, and he said, you know, these guys are sexist out here, and I'm not sure that they're going to accept a woman telling them what to do. And he said, I know I'm sensitive to this issue, but you know, I'm just want to alert you to this potential problem. And I told him, I said, I looked at this problem. I mean, I looked at this, but you know, we're sending our best people out there to help them. And so, you know, my initial reaction was saying, if they don't like it, then we're not going to train them at all. But then I said, look, we'll send her out there, look at the situation, and if there are problems, you know, I don't want her to be blamed for anything. So we'll take a look at it and then get back to me if there's a problem. She was supposed to be out there for 3 weeks. So 2 weeks, she went. And so 2 weeks later, the COS called me back And I thought, okay, what's wrong? So he said, no, nothing's wrong. He said, she's staying 3 weeks. They want her to stay 2 more weeks after that. They love her because she outshot them, she outdrank them, and she was smarter than they were. So it just goes to show you sometimes people, you've got to look at various situations and then try to make the best decisions. They're not all successful, but people deserve an opportunity to be successful, and that's what I think we should give them. So
That's very good. And your director, the current director, Gina Haspel, in her speech a couple years ago, talked about her superiors when she was a younger case officer, giving her chances and putting her against hard problems, and how rewarding it was to be chosen, even though when she was growing up in the agency, it was pretty male. So I applaud the agency for all these many successes. So Grayson Real, we have, I believe Grayson, you're a sophomore at Duke, I believe. Why don't you take the floor and ask your question to Mel, please?
Of course, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. You've addressed topics that I think we are all particularly interested in, given events of this summer and of the current administration. So something I've been wrestling with is this notion of how one might reconcile doing work for the mission, as you've spoken about, but also recognizing that work and the activities related to that work might affect marginalized communities, particularly ones that you might identify with.
Excellent question, and a tough one. I, like you, when I first joined the agency, I was a very independent person, and work was work, and my private life was my private life. But the reality is, and I'm smiling about it because it's a tough one, and we still fight this. The CIA really, your work is everything. It's changing because of the current generation. But you had to, like, for example, if you want to travel somewhere, travel overseas, not so much in the US, but even in the US, you have to be careful. But especially overseas, you need to get approval to travel overseas. And so they know where you're going. You have to, they're tracking you. Now you think it's because I know you're probably saying, well, they just want to keep track of my life. But no, it's for protection. It's for protection, because should something happen with a plane, or should there be a kidnapping of a bus and you happen to be on that bus, they want to know, because in the CIA's case, they are protective of you on it. So as you would look at it as overprotective. And I've had young officers who fought this because they get on a plane and then they go to London and they'd spend a weekend in London or something, and without telling anyone, and then they would get in trouble. That's one part of it. Your personal life, family life, it depends on the job. If you're an analyst, you have a lot more freedom to just to do practically whatever you want. But if you're a case officer, you a lot of times your family life is also with your work. If you're meeting with somebody, taking them out to dinner, you'll take your husband out with you. You don't have to, but in a lot of situations, that's a second set of eyes on that person that you're looking at. And sometimes the person that you're working against may have kids, and you will have kids, so you tend to get together. So it's not like you can separate everything out. It's one. It incorporate it's all of you. It's in it if you're on the operational side of it. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Is Was there
Grayson, do you
more?
need to follow up?
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Did you need to follow up?
No, I think you addressed that question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Becca Dudley, are you, I believe you're next.
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for this really, really awesome discussion. I've really appreciated it, and it's been super enlightening. So thank you for being here. I have a question that kind of relates back to something that you and Professor Nichols had started to had kind of touched on a little bit about some of the different agencies within the intelligence community and how they all kind of fit together. But I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to your experience with working across different agencies, and the I know obviously a level of collaboration and coordination is needed, but can be really difficult, particularly when you have things like different organizational cultures and such that you've alluded to. So to what extent do you think that that process works at the moment, and what could be improved? And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on working together as the intelligence community as a whole.
Again, excellent question, because you know, the easy answer is this. We work, agencies are personality driven. So if you have people that want to work with you and understand it, whether it's the FBI or DEA or DOD or State Department, things work out well and you get them done. I'll get back to answering the question completely, but I took a course when I became a senior officer. It's called the Senior Seminar Course. And it's a State Department run course. It was, they've gotten rid of it, which I thought was the worst thing they could have done. But there were representatives from the intelligence community. State Department had half of the positions. There were, in my class, there were 33. So about 15 of them were State Department people that were on track to become ambassadors or deputy chiefs of missions. There was a representative from each military service, and they were on track to become generals or admirals within their areas. So we were together, the 33 of us, for 9 months. We traveled all over the US. We became the best of friends, and we learned from each other the missions and what the difficulties were. So after we graduated from that course, when I had problems, let's say it was with DOD on a certain issue, I could reach out to a person who had become a general and say, hey, can you help me with this, or can you help me understand this? And we resolved that without getting into the bureaucratic infighting. So that was one way of doing it. But the other way is, as I said, it's personality driven. And when I went to, I had to attend PCC meetings, policy coordination meetings. Some of these were down, down at the White House. We would and we would be at the table, and all representatives from there would be there. And the infighting, the bureaucratic infighting, could be tough. But depending on the issue, sometimes I would side with state, sometimes I would side with DOD, and the others would do it too. But in the end, while we disagreed sometimes vehemently on issues, the objective was to work it out so that we can give policymakers recommendations on the best way forward on this. And hopefully in answering the question, the agencies, from a systemic perspective, I'm not sure if there are solutions, because what it really comes down to is who's in charge and what's that relationship with what the FBI and the director of the CIA or director of NSA, that's what it really comes down to whether it's going to work or not. That's the reality from my perspective.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Let's go to Peter Connolly, and then James Settles will follow after that. So Peter, over to you.
Hi, Mr. Gamble. Thanks again for taking the time to talk to us. My question is, as we've kind of seen populism kind of rise in Western democracies and kind of undercut, the reports and official reports from intelligence communities, how do you see kind of combating this threat and making sure that intelligence reports and briefings aren't kind of subverted for political reasons? And also, how do you kind of see maintaining an optimism and faith in intelligence gathering and training the next generation of intelligence operatives?
Boy, you guys asked some really tough questions there. When I joined the agency, one of the first thing that they look at you is integrity, and integrity plays I mean, that's it. If you don't have integrity, you don't belong in the CIA, or much less in any government. So when when I say we, the CIA, the one thing we pride ourselves on is gathering the facts as they're reported to us, and then and there's a difference. There's a difference between gathering the intelligence facts when somebody tells you something, or you've obtained it through whatever methods. Those are the facts. So, and you report the facts, and then our analysts and others look at that, and they write the report based on that. Now, if they want your opinion, that's a separate piece of paper and writing that you would submit to them. So you separate out the facts from your opinions or beliefs. And the one we in the CIA, the one thing we pride ourselves on is telling the truth and reporting it as it is. Again, and you'll find, and we will fight over this. I mean, the analysts are very proud of trying to give the best assessments. Now, they may, what's the word? They may they don't use words like possibility, but sometimes they may hinge one way or the other on what they want to say, because they don't want to be put in a position of saying, you should do exactly this. So they'll refine it or qualify it. That's the best word I can find to do that. But other than that, they're going to tell you the truth, and they take pride in that. And they will call you out on it, like any of us, if you try to change the information or write it in such a way that you're not telling the truth and sending it to the policymaker, because that's what the policymaker wants to hear. We won't do that. Now, I can't speak for all of the intelligence agencies, but I really do believe that I believe that with the FBI, and I believe it with DOD. I'm going to leave Homeland Security alone because I don't know them. Only people I know are the Secret Service in that part of the group, and they're honorable people. So, so I'm probably not answering your question the way that I'm giving you a specific answer, but most all the people that I know are honorable people, and they're not. I would bet my career on it that most people are not going to. The majority of people, if not all, are not going to lie or make up intelligence just to please someone. I'm sorry, I forgot about the second part of what you had asked, Peter. Oh.
Peter, did you want to follow? Did you want to restate the second part of your question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask kind of how, maintaining that line between politics and intelligence briefing, and then also kind of, ensuring that the next generation of intelligence operatives kind of maintains that same level of integrity.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it kind of follows what I said. You come in when you're recruited into these organizations. It's with that sense of integrity and you'll find people. It's one of the tests. Here's an example. One of the tests in the agency is if you do something wrong, you admit it, because if you don't admit it, then how can we trust you when no one's around to see? And we've fired people, whether it was in training or in the job, if we found that they've lied about certain things. The integrity, it's really at the top of the list. I can't overemphasize that. You can make mistakes. I mean, we make mistakes, and the thing is, in that part, if you learn from your mistakes, you'll be fine. But if you don't learn from your mistakes, then you're probably going to have a short career with the agency.
Thank you. Mel, next is James Settles, and then after that, Caroline.
Okay.
Hey, thank you very much. So I'm actually I do intel for the Army, and similar to what your experience you talked about, I would say that the intel community in the military also lacks diversity in terms of representation to look like what the American populace or the world looks like. I was wondering if you could speak to, if you were trying to talk to a young person of color, or to somebody from a smaller or marginalized community, or a diverse community, how would you sell them on coming into intel? Because that's the one thing I look around is, and I always struggle, is like, how do you proposition that, and what do you tell them is to bring that representation into the community? Thank you.
Okay. No, it's an excellent question. And one of the things when I managed the recruitment center for the agency, all of this is a learning experience. I mean, we all come in with certain set beliefs that we think, oh, we can just go out and hire people and tell them this is the way it is, and they'll join. And I tried to do two quick examples. When I met an young Asian lady, and gave her the spiel about joining the agency, and she had great grades, and she had done well, and to me she was a perfect candidate. And there was a group of us, but she asked if she could speak to me privately, and I said sure. So when we were alone, she said, okay, how many Asians are there in senior positions like me? I mean, how many people like me are in senior positions in the agency? And I told her I couldn't give her a number, but I said there were some. And so that was not satisfactory to her, because she said, I don't want to be the first in anything, except for in excellence. She said, so I don't want to strive to be the first director or deputy or whatever. And I took home that point, because I said, I felt her in that sense. I said, I hear you on that, but somebody has to be first. I said, I was first. And I said, and look at me, I'm happy, but she didn't buy that. So I learned a lesson from that about trying to bring in people, not just Blacks, because there are issues, and you need to convince them that, one, they're going to be accepted. Two, that a lot of people don't want to necessarily, they know there's a bureaucracy, they know that there are certain issues, but most of them don't want to have to deal with the issue of color if they don't have to, or being discriminated against, or not feeling that they're accepted. So what I tell them is that it is changing. Sometimes we need people to be the change agents, and when we get a pipeline, we're working on getting a pipeline of officers in. They can make it. They can make those changes. Somebody has to do it. I mean, before me, and I mean, we had Martin Luther King. We had other leaders in the Black community that did some of the hard stuff. And there's always going to be hard stuff to do, but as long as you're breaking down those barriers, pretty soon it will be easier for the next generation and the next generation. But if no one does it, it's going to always stay the same. And if it stays the same and you didn't step forward, then that's on you just as much as it is on everyone else. That's probably not the best recruiting thing to get people in, but it's a great job. It's a great opportunity, and there's some things that are difficult, but most things you're going to find that you are going to enjoy doing that job.
Okay, thank you. I think we probably have time for maybe 2 more questions. So we'll go with Caroline and then with Dan Billings. And I just want to reiterate to the students that there are 2 really cool events coming up. The October 26th, Mohammed Darash to talk about the Jewish-Arab relations, and then November 9th, Phil Zelikow, a very well-known scholar, to talk about some of the issues with foreign policy coming up. So I wanted to throw a quick pitch for those things. Now over to you, Caroline.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. So my question is a little bit different. You've been speaking a lot about working with other intelligence agencies, both within Washington and abroad. I'm wondering, given the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, what does crosstalk with US intelligence agencies and other organizations like the CDC or the NIH look like for biological or chemical concerns?
It's a good question, Caroline, and it's a national security issue. I mean, that's the we've been focused on this well before this pandemic. Even before I retired, this was 2008. I had talked to the military about. The military had talked to me about because of AFRICOM, which is in Europe in Stuttgart. Their people, they were concerned about 3 things. Well, a lot of things, but I mean, if you exclude the terrorism and the stuff that's ongoing, water, pandemic, and climate change. Those were the 3 things that they were interested in and concerned about, and thought we needed to focus on those a lot more than we have been. And I know before I left, we were gearing up for that, because one of the biological and chemical issues that were out there. And as you've seen with the Russians, they continue to use some of those things right now. So it's an issue. It's one that I think I can't speak for the current administration on it, but I know that the intelligence community they have been gearing up to deal with those issues and figure out how we can best attack them, or at least protect not only American citizens but the world with against some of these types of issues. So.
Okay, I think we might be able to fit one more in before we get to Dan Billings, and maybe that's Colin Lee. Colin, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm right here. Sorry about that. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Just
Good.
back to like that relationship with the military, someone who's kind of interested in both military intelligence and civilian intelligence, what would you say are some big differences in like capabilities and like mission sets? Like, I guess focusing on the global war on terror, and then how do you envision that changing with our changing conflicts with your peer adversaries in the future? Thank you.
Okay. It's well, the difference between the civilian and the military are the intelligence requirements, obviously. So for us, there's something called a national intelligence strategy, which comes down and tells each department what they should be focused on. So that's what generates the intelligence requirements. I'm just trying to think of how I can word it for you on the career in the military. Again, there are two aspects to it, and that's why I'm struggling with it. I'm trying to think of General Brooks. General Brooks, anyway, I forget what General Brooks' first name is, but anyway, he was the head of the Korean mission.
Vince Brooks.
Vince, thank you. Vince Brooks. If you talk to him about the intelligence aspects of it, I mean, some of it it's problematic. Because I think for the military, the career track, and Tim may be able to explain that better than I can. The career track for them is not one that's very, very. They need to revamp it or need to look at it from a different way so that people can go out. So that there's a track for them to be promoted to the general ranks, and that's what they need to figure out. Now, having said that, I worked with probably one of the most dynamic people in that field during the Iraq War, and that was General. Well, even before he was head of JSOC, and that was General McChrystal. And he used intelligence like no one I've ever seen use it. And he was damn good with it. And I admired him of how he took it, whether it was our intelligence or his own intelligence, he had it right. So, and I was hoping that there would be people that would follow in his footsteps on the military side that would continue to do so. On the civilian side, you know, we're pretty consistent. We have the requirements that we need to follow, and that will always stay on track. So I can say it's a good career track. I wish I could say more about the military part, but I have a very limited knowledge on it, and I've only heard, you know, the parts about why it's not as successful as it could be. And I believe it can be very successful because there are good officers there who are doing, who work with us. And when I say us, the CIA, and we work with them on a lot of issues. But again, it's that career track that I think is problematic with them.
Good question. And Colin, I'm happy to talk with you offline sometime about that, about the military career and some of the differences, who the customers are, and you know why you could be in one country and the CIA could be looking at something very, very different than the military operating in that country. And that's because two professional organizations are after two professionally different requirements. So it's part of the job, and that completely appropriate. So Dan Billings, I hope that you're still there.
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you so much for this. I just had a short question. We're obviously in the middle of an election right now. I was wondering whether you could maybe speak a bit about the ways in which, if there is a change of administration, the Biden administration's relationship with the intelligence community might differ from the Obama administration's, just in terms of some of the issues that they're confronting. And you spoke a lot about how personality matters a lot within these agencies, maybe how their personalities differ. Thank you.
Wait. So I'm not sure I got the question on that. Sorry, Daniel.
Sure, no, that's fine. Just the ways in which maybe the Biden administration's relationship with the intelligence community would differ from the Obama administration's.
Okay. From the personalities that I've met, that I know that are working with the Biden administration, you're probably going to see some of the same people that were in the Obama administration, but Biden, and I left at the beginning of the Obama administration, so I mean I knew the personalities that were there, Susan Rice and there's a whole group of them, but I think Biden might be a little different. I think Biden is less, and this is my own personal view, I think he's going to be, well, the relationship with the intelligence community will be fine. That will be fine. I think he, from a foreign policy perspective, I think he's going to, he's for NATO, he's for all of the relationships with the foreign community, which we need, and we because we can't do it alone. He may be less inclined to be aggressive in going after in conflicts. He may be less inclined to be engaged in that part. But otherwise, I think he'll be fine in terms of working with the intelligence community and respecting it and trying to get the most out of it. So because again, those issues, and there are a lot of issues out there. As I said, climate change. I know people don't want to hear that, but it's an important issue. And I'm an old guy. I should be the last that's on board with that, but it's an important issue, and as well as the pandemics. And this is just the beginning of these things. That's the scary part about it. For the old guy like me, when we were always afraid of syphilis and HIV and so forth. And then when you got H1N1 and all of these other pandemics coming up, we've got a challenge. And I'll speak for Dr. Fauci. We've got to get ahead of this as much as we can, or at least be prepared to know how to deal with it for the future. So that's all of that to say that I think the Biden administration will be working very closely with the intelligence community to do the best thing for the American people, and then also for the world. Because if we neglect the world, people come and go from outside into the U.S. So we've got to protect them and help them protect themselves just as much as we're protecting ourselves. And so that's my political speech on it. So I'll end it there.
Could I just follow up and say, would you characterize the potential Biden administration is also just having a generally larger appetite for intelligence? Like, you characterize the current administration as not really demonstrating a huge appetite at the highest levels for listening, for directing questions, for getting and consuming intelligence. Do you think that this, if there's a change in administration, that the new administration will be more hungry to absorb redirect intelligence to have a better understanding?
Absolutely, Tim. I mean, you couldn't have put it better. I think that I think because there are so many issues out there, and I still am puzzled by it. You know, we have a lot of different areas that we look at, whether it's Korea, North Korea, or Russia, or China, or Africa, or South America, narco traffickers, all of these things. I've always felt that we have specialists in those areas, and I just don't understand why we're caught off guard, or that I know it's about money and resources. Trust me, I know that part well. But if you got that job, everybody should be doing their job. And that's where I think the Biden administration is going to come in, and they're going to task everybody to do these various jobs so that we won't be caught by surprise. It used to be in the old days, the surprises were the coup d'etat in a particular place. Now it's, as I've said, it's the pandemic, it's climate change, it's economics. There are a number of things out there that we need to be focused on. So I think this administration will do that.
Well, we've just about run out of time, so I want to take a moment here and thank you. Thank you for your optimism. You just by hearing you talk, I think it's very inspiring for people who are thinking about stepping into the national security, and for your encouragement of them to take the risks and to jump into a career that is challenging and puts them overseas in some difficult situations, and really relies on them to help us solve problems. And also for talking a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced, and how the agency has grown and matured over time. We have just a minute left, and I thought it would be appropriate to kind of turn over to you and you make any final comments, talk directly to the Duke students or to the students of the universities in the Triangle. And you know, I know how much they appreciate what you've contributed today.
Oh, thank you. And I do. I'm glad you said it was optimistic that I displayed that, because it is, like I said, I could be the poster boy for the CIA in terms of a career and just a great job. It's more than you would ever expect. It's a great job, not just in my job, but as I said, I've worked with the FBI overseas and here, and DOD, the military intel guys, and so forth, across the intelligence board. And they're great people across all of those agencies that I have the utmost respect for, and I would work with them again anytime. So it's a great career. So I say seriously consider it. Do not be disillusioned by what you see now. But when you get in, you arrive there, you'll find that it'll be worth the time that you've invested in it. So thank you for your time, and thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate you taking the time on a busy beginning of a busy week. So for everyone in the American Grand Strategy Program, I look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks with our next event. And for Mel, thank you so much. Really inspiring words, and we'll adjourn for the day.
Okay,
So thank you so
Tom.
much.
Great meeting you.